Good morning, coming to you from South Central Nebraska. This is the channel Agronomy Blitz, accelerated insights for your agronomic advantage. My name is Tyler Brugdenhill. I'm a technical agronomist in South Central Nebraska for the Channel Seed brand, and hope everybody had a wonderful 4th of July. I know we had a neighborhood party and hosted a lot of family and friends and had a really good time over the weekend. With that, let's jump into growing degree day departure. So if we look for the state of Nebraska, very similar trend as we've seen in past weeks. Get my clicker to work here, maybe. Um, so if we start looking at an April 20th plant date, if we started planting there, for my area specifically, if you look at Kearney, you're about 71 units ahead for the April 20th plant date, down to Alma at 92 units ahead. So Minden's still kind of in a cold spot at about 23 units behind. Nothing to get worked up about at all there, but really most of the states starting to trend ahead versus behind. We still have a little bit of an area to the east here that just continues to sit a little bit further behind than most, but nothing to get super worked up about from a growth and development standpoint. Now, similarly, if you waited 2 weeks later and started planting on the 4th of May, uh, surprisingly, if you look at Kearney, you're about 59 units ahead of the 30-year average. So 59 units on the 4th of May versus 71 units on the 20th of April. And then, again, similarly, if you go down and 85 units at Alma with a May 4th plant date compared to 92 units ahead with the 20th of April plant date. So not a huge amount of difference really seen in the two plant dates this year. Uh, Differences across the state when you look at outside of my area for sure, but not huge amount of differences. We're seeing a lot of that heat units start to get caught up as we continue throughout the growing season here into the month of July. So similarly, if we go into and look at precipitation ranks by climate district, so this is looking at from April 1st through July 6th. What does it look like from wettest to driest out of 133 years of data? South Central Nebraska continues to creep up into the wetter ranks, but still, as a whole, pretty darn average. With the eastern part of the state continuing to be fairly dry, and the western part of the state and the Panhandle seeing some of the wettest years that it has. So again, I've explained this map as you've progressed through my videos this year. It's kind of going from famine to feast. It almost feels like if you just look at precipitation ranks. So very welcomed difference in what we're seeing from early spring to now. But as we all know, we've got a long way to go to finish this crop out. If we think about the corn growth cycle, and I've looked at this map or this slide rather many times throughout these videos, and again, the best thing to think about is don't get wrapped up on the yield goal of 400 bushel. Rather get in tune with what is our nutrient use by growth stage. So if we look, uh, we're starting to get some tassels poking out here, but most of the corn's still in grain growth stage or pre-tassel. Okay, so that means, from a nitrogen standpoint, we've used half to almost, a little over 60% of our total nitrogen. From a phosphate standpoint, darn near half to 60%. From a potassium standpoint, you're 74 to, almost 85% of your total potassium needed to finish this crop is being used. So potash really important as we can see that growth curve, and we talked about that in weeks past. The amount of potassium uptake from V6 to V14 to really start to help that lignin and construction of the cell wall when we think about corn growth and development. Sulfate really hasn't ramped up all that much. When we get to tassel, we've only used about 10% of what we would consider the normal or needed sulfur intake for this crop. So again, if we're still thinking about, hey, I need something else to this crop, or I'm looking to supplement something, and we've got that ability for a wide drop, or we've got fertigation ability. Start to ask yourself, what has my sulfur use been? What is my soil test telling me that I maybe need to be applying to help this corn, really finish itself out? What's going on in the cornfield? I kind of alluded to this. We're starting to see some tassels just peak, and that's the early planted stuff. I would say most of my area is still this rapid growth, right at pre-tassel to just starting to tassel. Okay, so the big thing is that I'm thinking about is we're really starting to get uh, out of the green sap susceptibility. Once we hit tassel, we've got a lot more lignin built up in that plant. We're through rapid growth. We've established how tall that crop is going to be maximum, and we're switching from a vegetative mindset to a reproductive mindset in that plant. So we've established the root system, we've established the total factory, so to speak, that we're going to need to build this crop. So um, again, I've talked about this in the past. If you look at this growth stage, when you get to R1, we're really starting to think about kernel weight. So, establishing the maximum amount of kernels is going to be at that VT to R1. How many of those kernels can we pollinate? And of those kernels we pollinate, from there on out, it's, hey, how much weight can we pack into that kernel? How much can we make that kernel weigh? And then ears per area. We can still have wind events, obviously, past this. We're less susceptible, but we can still definitely have some green snap capability. So that's where that ears per area still comes into play there. How many harvestable ears are we actually going to finish the year with? A little bit of a tar spot update. Pretty slow progress in terms of reporting last week. I assume that's in part of being a shorter week with the holiday. Uh, Again, just because there was no progress on this map does not mean that tar spot likely isn't in some of these counties that are grayed or white. It just simply means it hasn't been officially reported. So, uh, highly encourage folks, especially with tassels starting to come out, make sure we're doing our due diligence in staging that crop, getting that stage right, and making the correct fungicide decision based on what pathogens are being seen and present in those fields. So um, tar spot's kind of the poster child right now. I've seen some northern corn leaf blight. I'm still seeing some common rust, and obviously some gray leaf spots starting to show up. So just make sure we're doing our due diligence to get out there, know what that field history has been like for pathogens, and make sure we're identifying them correctly so we're making the right fungicide choice based on what that field is telling us. Soybean field, again, not a huge amount of change. We're still anywhere from beginning flowering to full bloom. I would say, still consider what those herbicide and other choices that we're making out and doing applications. Once we see flowers on soybeans, it becomes a really delicate process in what products we choose to apply to those. And again, this is a plant that has now gone from continuing vegetative growth on the top of the plant to having a reproductive mindset and starting flower initiation as well. So the more flowers we put on, obviously the more pods and the more beans. So anything we can do to keep those flowers on that plant, we want to make sure we're doing it. Um, and again, just continue to consider what we're doing in the soybean field and continue to look for that nodulation. I know there's been some calls come in about things like white mold. I think with the cooler finish that we had to June, I think those conditions are correct. Um, Continue to scout for that and understand if you've had that field history or not. For the agronomic topic, I really wanted to look at lodge corn versus Greensnap. Again, we've had some wind events come through, but I really wanted to spend a little bit of time on here. So if we have lodge corn that's going to gooseneck and recover and shoot some shoot some, nodal roots from those nodes that are gooseneck to kind of support itself. I'm not going to read this all to you, but an Ohio study looked at corn plants that were artificially lodged greater than 80-degree angle at V10, V13, VT, and R3. So your grain losses basically average anywhere from 5 to 43%. The plants lodged at V10 was about 5% and 2% barren plants, while the plants lodged at VT had a 43% yield loss with 8% barren plants. So nothing super uh, out of the ordinary, I would say. Obviously, the closer we get to VT, the more impact that's going to have on potential for reproductive issues, and then obviously translating to yield loss in total. Now, when we're going through rapid growth stage, obviously you can have things like green snap, brittle snap, whatever you want to call that. Um, so, obviously, if we're going through that rapid growth phase, we're growing so fast that we can't put enough lignin in those cell walls to make the rigidity of that stalk be as powerful as we want it to be. So we're very susceptible for that corn going into a wind event. So the reality is if you snap above the ear, yes, you can still put an ear on, but that corn plant that's above the ear is going to contribute about 70% of that photosynthetic capability needed to fill it. So we greatly reduce what that ear could have been, obviously. So, again, not great cases, but understanding and managing, being able to manage through both these scenarios is really, really important to understand. And then lastly, again, I think we've touched on this for every week, but I really want to see this through this year, talking crop water use and the importance of being able to water into these reproductive growth stages in corn and soybeans both becomes increasingly critical, especially with the finish that we had last year. I know guys have been running these pivots super, super early to get some of this out of the ground. Thankfully, from Mother Nature, we've had a little bit of a break and a hiatus that she's provided us some help from natural rainfall here in the late, but it's very, very critical as we go on here. Make sure we're watering up until the end of this crop's life to get the maximum seed weight that we can out of this crop. So we've done a good job up until now. Mother Nature's helped us out. Let's make sure we do our due diligence and water it up to its full potential. So, as always, thanks for another great week, and hope you tune in next week.